January 26, 2026. A Russian military truck rolls forward toward the front. It moves slowly, too slowly to feel dangerous. The roof is gone. The doors are missing. Inside, infantry sit exposed, facing open ground and a thin line of trees ahead. Nothing about the scene looks unusual. This is what war often looks like right before something breaks. What the soldiers inside the truck cannot see is the sky above them. Not as empty air, but as a system. Cameras, thermal sensors, operators watching in real time. On modern battlefields, combat does not begin with gunfire. It begins with detection. The moment movement is noticed, the clock starts ticking. And once movement becomes visible, even routine actions can turn deadly. This is not the story of a single strike or one unlucky unit. It is a snapshot of how war is fought now, when the sky no longer observes quietly, but actively decides what survives below. What happened next was not sudden. It was already set in motion long before the truck reached the trees. First warning signs appeared well before any explosion. The Russian unit was already moving under pressure, not control. The vehicle carrying the infantry was not an armored personnel carrier. It was a stripped-down cargo truck, modified for speed and necessity rather than protection. Removing the roof and doors is not a tactical choice made from confidence. It is a sign of manpower strain, limited equipment, and urgency. These trucks are used when troops must be moved quickly using whatever is available. Often when armored options are either damaged, unavailable, or already committed elsewhere along the front. To the soldiers inside, the ride likely felt routine. Uncomfortable, exposed, but familiar. Many armies rely on similar transport when logistics are stretched thin. What had changed was not the truck, it was the environment it was moving through. For decades, tree lines served as natural protection in war. They broke sight lines, they offered concealment, they created the feeling of safety at the edge of open ground. Infantry doctrine across generations treated forest edges as temporary safe zones, places to dismount, reorganize, and wait for the next order. That assumption no longer holds. Trees do not block thermal imaging. They do not hide movement from overhead cameras. They do not stop surveillance systems watching from kilometers away. What once felt like cover has become predictable, and predictability is deadly. Ukrainian UAV operators did not react suddenly when the truck appeared. They were already watching. The vehicle was tracked from above, as part of a wider observation pattern. Operators followed its speed, its turns, and the way it slowed near the forward area. This was not about destroying a target immediately. It was about understanding intent. Repeated behavior reveals where soldiers believe they are safest. By the time the truck reached the tree line, its destination was no surprise. The moment the infantry dismounted, everything changed. Soldiers spread out along the trees. Some moved toward cover. Others paused to orient themselves. This is a normal response after transport, but under constant surveillance, it becomes exposure. Each body produced heat. Each step created motion. Each pause confirmed the position. The danger did not begin with an explosion. It began with movement inside a space that was already being watched. From above, the unit did not look like individuals reacting moment to moment. It looked like signals entering a mapped zone. This is where modern risk begins. The soldiers were not outgunned yet. They were not under fire yet, but they were visible. And visibility is now the first vulnerability. Once detected, every decision happens under observation. Even correct instincts, spreading out, seeking cover, worked against them by confirming presence and location. The battlefield punished movement itself. Not because it was reckless, but because it was seen. Nothing about this scene looks dramatic. There is no charge, no obvious mistake, no reckless behavior. The soldiers did what units have done for generations. What changed was the context. The sky above was no longer passive. It was an active layer of control. In this environment, simply arriving can trigger a chain of events that cannot be stopped. Once exposure occurred, the battle did not unfold through chaos. It unfolded through systems. Modern combat no longer relies on a single weapon acting alone. What followed was a closed kill chain. Detection, tracking, strike, all connected. all continuous. There was no pause between stages. Thermal surveillance removed the last illusion of concealment. Body heat stood out against cold ground and vegetation. Trees and shallow cover no longer mattered. Heat does not stop at leaves or branches. From the operator's screen, the terrain became a map of living targets. As the first strikes landed, the Russian soldiers reacted in trained ways. They dispersed. They increased spacing. They tried to blend into the environment. These were not panic responses. They were correct responses for older wars. Against constant tracking, dispersion created more targets instead of fewer. Once cohesion broke, individuals became easier to isolate. FPV drones were not acting alone. They were tools inside a larger network. When a drone struck near a group, it forced movement. When soldiers moved, that movement was recorded. That information flowed instantly to other systems. Artillery and indirect fire adjusted based on drone feeds. Nothing was random. Nothing was rushed. Each strike was guided by real-time feedback. Artillery entered the fight as an extension of surveillance. Coordinates arrived quickly. Adjustment time shrank. What once took minutes now happened in seconds. In older wars, observers worked with limited visibility and delayed communication. Here, corrections were nearly immediate. Pressure came from multiple directions at once. There was no space to reset. For the soldiers on the ground, the most damaging factor was not explosive power. It was the loss of time. Decisions had to be made instantly, often without knowing where the next threat would come from. Stopping meant being tracked. Moving meant being tracked. There was no safe choice. This is the defining feature of modern combat. Firepower matters, but speed and coordination matter more. Once inside the surveillance loop, survival depends on avoiding detection entirely, and once detected, escape becomes nearly impossible. As pressure increased, Ukrainian operators shifted focus. The goal was no longer just to hit targets, it was to control movement. Paired FPV drones were used deliberately, one to disrupt, one to watch. A field shelter became the next focus. The first drone entered the structure and detonated inside. The goal was not total destruction, it was displacement. Staying inside became impossible. That choice mattered. Forcing soldiers to flee shapes the next phase of the fight. Escape routes are predictable from above. A second drone held overwatch. It waited. As soldiers exited, their movement was followed precisely. There was no rush. The operators controlled the pace. The psychological impact is hard to overstate. Running is dangerous. Stopping feels exposed. The explosions do not come all at once. They come in intervals, measured, observed, adjusted. That rhythm matters because this is no longer an exchange of fire between two sides reacting blindly. This is a system applying pressure, watching how the enemy responds and then applying more pressure in the exact place where resistance weakens. On the ground, the Russian unit is trying to recover structure. After the first strikes, small groups instinctively try to reform around whoever appears to be in charge. A senior soldier gestures toward a shallow trench line. Another signals toward thicker brush. Someone attempts to establish spacing. Radios crackle briefly, then go quiet again. But every regrouping attempt creates a visible cluster. From above, clusters stand out. The operators are not guessing where they'll apply the next strike. They are reading behavior in real time. When three soldiers compress into the same piece of cover, that becomes a decision point. When a pair breaks off and moves faster than the rest, that becomes another. Nothing is random. Each movement generates consequence. The drones do not rush in recklessly. They reposition first. They gain angle. They confirm heat signatures. They watch for second-order movement. Who follows whom? Who hesitates? Who lingers too long? This is what modern battlefield control looks like. It is not loud at first. It is quiet, calculated, and continuous. A drone dips lower over a section of tree line.
The soldiers beneath it freeze. They cannot tell whether it is locked on or is simply observing. That uncertainty locks them in place longer than any command would, and that pause is recorded. When another strike lands nearby, not directly on them but close enough to send dirt and splinters flying, the purpose is not only destruction, it is redirection. Force them left, force them right, force them to choose. Every forced choice reveals intent. Intent reveals pattern. Pattern allows prediction, and prediction allows dominance. The unit on the ground begins to lose its sense of initiative. Instead of deciding where to move based on terrain, they begin moving based on where the last explosion occurred. They are no longer maneuvering with purpose, they are maneuvering to avoid the last threat. That is a losing rhythm. Because the sky is not reacting to the last movement, it is preparing for the next one. When a damaged shelter collapses partially, a few soldiers attempt to crawl deeper into what remains. That makes sense under artillery, but under thermal surveillance, concealment does not equal invisibility. Heat bleeds through debris, the drone camera adjusts contrast, shapes become clear. Another drone hovers farther back, higher altitude, wider view. This one is not striking, it is mapping. It tracks routes soldiers take when they flee. It records which trees provide the most attempted cover. It marks the shallow depressions in the ground that attract regrouping. Those locations will matter later. Because in modern combat, information compounds. Every engagement improves the next one. On the ground, time begins to feel distorted. Seconds stretch. Silence becomes threatening. The absence of a strike is not comforting, it is suspense. Soldiers begin scanning upward more than forward. Their posture changes. Heads tilt back. Rifles angle toward the sky instead of the horizon. That shift is critical. When attention turns upward, ground awareness shrinks. The battlefield tilts vertically, and whoever controls the vertical layer controls tempo. Another drone streaks in low, fast, not even necessarily to hit. It forces bodies flat against frozen earth. Dirt sprays, someone shouts. Two soldiers scramble toward opposite sides of a narrow trench. The split is instinctive. It is also exploitable, because once separated, coordination slows. Visual contact breaks. Hand signals fail. Radio communication becomes fragmented, and fragmentation is weakness. From above, operators can see which group is more exposed. They can decide which movement offers better opportunity. They can delay a strike intentionally to let isolation deepen. This is not brute force, this is behavioral shaping. The Russian unit is not being overpowered in a traditional sense. It is being managed, pressured, observed until its structure softens. At this point, no single explosion defines the outcome. What defines it is cumulative stress. Every near miss adds tension. Every forced relocation burns energy. Every failed regrouping drains confidence. The soldiers begin making smaller movements, shorter sprints, quicker stops, less decisive advances toward any single direction. Caution increases, but caution slows reaction time, and slower reaction time makes detection even more decisive. The battlefield becomes a loop. Detection leads to pressure. Pressure leads to movement. Movement leads to more detection. There is no break in that loop. Even when drones pull back temporarily, their absence does not remove influence. The expectation of return shapes behavior just as strongly as their presence. A soldier glances at a damaged vehicle nearby. In another war, that vehicle might offer cover, a chance to mount a weapon, or at least something solid between him and incoming fire. Now, it's a heat signature waiting to be targeted. Vehicles are no longer shelter. They are magnets. One attempt is made to move toward a more fortified position farther back. It requires crossing open ground for less than 20 seconds. 20 seconds used to be survivable. Now it feels exposed. Half the group hesitates, the other half commits. That split fractures cohesion further. Above, the operators see it instantly. They do not need to strike both groups. They only need to apply pressure where fracture is deepest, because once cohesion bends, it rarely snaps back cleanly under observation. At this stage, the battlefield is no longer defined by lines. It is defined by exposure windows, short moments when movement creates vulnerability. The side that identifies those windows fastest controls escalation, and here the identification is near instant. The Russian unit is still armed, still capable, still present, but capability without coordination loses sharpness, momentum bleeds slowly, control shifts upward, and that's when the psychological tipping point sets in. Staying together increases risk, splitting up leads to isolation. Every instant conflicts with survival. The sky never looks away. This method works because of discipline. Paired drones require planning, patience, and clear roles. One disrupts, one decides. No wasted strikes, no uncertainty. Each action serves a purpose. Over time, this pressure spreads. Cohesion breaks not from panic, but from hesitation. Units struggle to regroup because coordination cannot be hidden. This reflects a larger shift in warfare. Instead of overwhelming firepower, pressure is applied selectively. Movement is guided step by step. Safe choices shrink until none remain. Even after initial strikes, operations continue. Positions are revisited. Shelters are destroyed to prevent reuse. Equipment is eliminated to prevent recovery. Terrain becomes temporary. The pressure expands outward. Isolated infantry, hasty fortifications, light vehicles. None are high-value targets alone, but together they sustain combat. By targeting them, operational capability erodes. There are no clear safe zones. Safety is no longer tied to distance from the front. It is tied to visibility. Without pauses, fatigue builds. Decision-making slows. Units hesitate to move even when necessary. Operational tempo drops, not from collapse, but from constant pressure. Drone presence becomes environmental. Sometimes action is unnecessary. Observation alone shapes behavior. Across the conflict, UAV involvement now accounts for a growing share of losses, not from dramatic moments, but from accumulation. Return strikes are not redundancy. They are how pressure is maintained. The result is erosion, not sudden defeat. Firepower weakens, mobility shrinks, coordination fades. Russian forces remain, but with fewer options. Taken together, this sequence shows how control from the air reshapes the battlefield. Movement becomes risk, defense becomes temporary, offense slows, not from one decisive strike, but minute by minute. Drones don't win wars alone. They change how wars are fought. They strip away initiative before orders take effect. They force reaction instead of decision. The modern front is no longer just drawn on maps. It exists in the air above every step taken on the ground. The question now is simple. How does an army adapt when hiding no longer works and the sky never looks away?
If you want deeper, clearer analysis like this on modern warfare, subscribe to Tactical Military and don't miss our next breakdown. How a Russian motorcycle unit entered a Ukrainian sniper kill zone, then this happened.